I have cried 3 times in my adult life, not 3 times total. I am not describing an emotional limitation or a calibrated relationship with feeling that restricts its expression to rare occasions. I mean 3 times in a specific way. That crying means something beyond the ordinary release of momentary feeling. 3 times where what happened was not a response to a single thing but the arrival of something accumulated. Something that had been building beneath the surface of a functioning life for long enough that when it finally came, it came completely. The first time I was alone. I have spoken about that elsewhere, not in detail, but enough. The third time was private in a different way. That one belongs to a context I am not ready to share. The second time, the one I want to tell you about today, was witnessed. That detail changes everything about it. Because crying alone is one kind of experience. It belongs to you entirely. It has no audience, no consequences beyond the interior, no element of being seen in a state that everything in your public life has been designed to prevent. Being witnessed is different. Being witnessed in that state by a specific person, in a specific moment, under specific circumstances, is an experience that exists in a completely different register. One I have never spoken about, one I have carried for years in a particular way you carry things that were too interior and too significant to share in any context where they might be misunderstood. Tonight, I am going to share it. You need to understand what that period of my life felt like before I can tell you about the night. There is a quality that extreme pressure produces, not the ordinary pressure of a demanding life, which I have always had and have learned to inhabit without significant difficulty. I mean the specific kind that arrives when multiple things are happening simultaneously that each require your full capacity. And your full capacity is not enough to address all of them at once. I was in that kind of pressure. Several things were happening that I cannot describe individually. Together they produced a specific quality of experience, a sense of operating at the absolute limit of what I was capable of sustaining, of getting through each day, not because it was manageable but because the alternative to getting through, it wasn't thinkable. I was not sleeping properly. That detail matters because sleep deprivation changes something fundamental about how you process experience. It removes the buffer that ordinarily exists between what happens and how you respond to it. Things land differently when you are operating without adequate rest. They arrive more directly, with less of the mediation that keeps a person functional. I had been in this state for longer than I want to admit, and the person who witnessed what happened that night was someone who had been close to me for long enough to understand the difference between my ordinary and difficult and my extraordinary and difficult, who had watched me navigate enough of both to have a reliable map of what each one looked like. They had said something to me earlier that evening. Not dramatically, it was the kind of thing said in passing, the kind of observation that a person close to you makes without necessarily intending it as a significant communication. But it landed. It landed because it was accurate. Because it named something I'd been carrying without having fully named it myself. Because hearing it said aloud by someone who had no agenda in saying it except simple observation did something to the structure that had been holding everything in place. I remember the precise sensation, like a key turning in something I had not known was locked. Nothing changed externally. The conversation continued. The evening continued. But internally something had shifted. Some arrangement had been disturbed. Some ordering of things that had been keeping a particular weight managed had been slightly altered. And the weight, no longer perfectly managed, began to move. We were sitting together later. The occasion had been ordinary, not a significant event, not a moment charged with any particular emotional weight in advance. The kind of evening that exists in the spaces between the things that matter publicly. The real texture of life, rather than its documented surface. I was not expecting anything. I think that is important. I had no awareness, going into that moment, of what was approaching. No sense of something building that I needed to prepare for or manage or redirect. I was simply present in an ordinary evening with someone I trusted, and then it arrived, not with warning, not as the culmination of a process I could feel happening. It simply arrived the way certain things arrive, completely and without announcement. In the moment between one breath and the next, I did not try to stop it. That is perhaps the most significant thing about what happened. Every instinct I have developed through years of public life, through the accumulated training of existing in a position where composure is not a preference but a requirement. Every one of those instincts should have activated. They did not, or they activated and I did not respond to them. I am still not entirely certain what the person across from me saw. I have thought about this from their perspective many times, tried to imagine what it looked like from outside that moment. They saw someone who had been composed a moment before become, suddenly and completely, not composed. Not gradually, not with a managed escalation that might have given both of us time to navigate towards something more controllable. Suddenly, as though whatever had been holding things in place had simply released all at once. They did not move immediately. I noticed that in the strange doubled awareness that exists in moments like that, where you are entirely inside an experience and simultaneously observing it from a small distance. They did not rush toward me or away from me. They did not immediately try to fix it or contain it or redirect it towards something more manageable. They stayed exactly where they were. And then, after a moment that felt longer than it probably was, they moved. Not to do anything specific. Not with any agenda beyond simple proximity. They simply moved closer and sat with me in it. I want to stay with what they did, which was so specifically the right thing that I have never forgotten it. The instinct, when someone you care about is in distress, is to do something, to offer words, to provide comfort in an active sense, to be useful in a way that can be pointed to and understood as help. They resisted that instinct. They understood through some combination of knowing me, specifically, and understanding human beings generally, that what that moment required was not action, was not words, was not any form of help that could be named and provided and checked off as given. What it required was presence. Simple, uncomplicated, non-interventionist presence. The willingness to be in the room with something difficult without trying to make it less difficult. To trust that the experience itself was doing what it needed to do and that interrupting it, even with kindness, even with the best intentions, would be a disruption rather than a support. They gave me that without being asked. Without any indication that they had made a conscious decision to do so. It seemed simply to be what they understood the moment needed. That is a rare thing to receive. I have not forgotten it. How long it lasted, I cannot give you an accurate account. Time moves differently inside experiences like that. What I can tell you is that it moved through stages in the way that complete things do. That it had a character that changed as it progressed. That by the end of it, whatever had been present at the beginning was different, not gone, not resolved, not fixed in any way that you could point to specifically, but different. Processed in some essential way, rather than simply endured. At some point the quality of the room changed. Something eased. Not dramatically, there was no single moment of recovery. But gradually, in the way that storms graduate towards stillness, things became quieter. I was aware, when it was over, of a profound exhaustion. The kind that follows the expenditure of something real rather than the mechanical continuation of ordinary function. A tiredness that reached all the way down rather than existing only at the surface and underneath. The exhaustion, something else. Something I had not felt for a long time. Something that felt, strange as it sounds, like the beginning of being able to breathe normally again. We did not talk about it, night. And not in any sustained or direct way afterward. This is perhaps the part that would surprise most people. The expectation being that an experience like that would naturally lead to a conversation, to some kind of processing through language of what had just happened. It did not. And I think the absence of that conversation was itself significant. Was itself the right thing, in the same way that their stillness during it had been the right thing. There are experiences that do not need to be discussed to be fully shared, that exist completely and permanently in the record between two people without ever becoming the subject of a conversation, that are more real for having been left in their original form rather than translated into the reduced and necessarily imprecise version that language produces. What happened that night lives in that category. We both know it happened. We both know what it meant. We have never needed to say so. What changed after that night is difficult to quantify because the changes were interior rather than external. The external continued as before. The demands were the same. The responsibilities were unchanged.